Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, but more specifically, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, Bitcoin dominance, one shining moment. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So you may be wondering, why are we calling it one shining moment? Well, I'm glad you asked. The reason is because, well, March Madness has arrived. And in the same way, a year ago, we did a Bitcoin dominance video, one shining moment, when Bitcoin dominance was at about 48%. I thought, why not do the same thing today, a year later, a full year later, and now the Bitcoin dominance has moved from 48% up to around that 54% level. So it's been a year. It's taken a long time to move from 48% to 54%. And certainly during that entire time, there have been a lot of altcoins that have done well against Bitcoin. But as I've said, more times than I care to count, it does not detract from the overall trend that some alts are outperforming. A majority of them are and likely will continue to bleed back to the king. Now, in the same way that we did this last year with one shining moment, we will have another Into the Cryptoverse March Madness bracket challenge. And so to join the group, you just follow the link in the description below or the pinned comment, and you will need to enter in a password. The password I will also put down there, but it is BTC.D. That is the password. All right. You get one team or one bracket, I should say, and whoever wins will get a free year subscription to Into the Cryptoverse. So again, doesn't cost you a thing to sign up. Links in the description below, and hopefully I will see a lot of people signing up. It's always a lot of fun because I think it's fun. I mean, if you're not in the States, then you might not even know what I'm talking about. But essentially, it's college basketball tournament, and I at least like watching it. So if you are interested, links in the description below. Fill out a bracket, and we'll have some fun providing updates on sort of who's in the lead at various points. We did the same thing last year. So check that out. So, as far as Bitcoin dominance goes, this is probably not going to be nearly as long as some of the Bitcoin dominance videos that I do, basically because I'm really not feeling that well, why should today be any different than any other day? But I just don't really feel like talking for an hour and a half, especially considering that dominance, has been at the same level that it's been at, essentially for the last half year. In October, we were at 54%. And we're at that same level. So, essentially I could probably just re-upload the same video, the last video I did on Bitcoin dominance a couple of weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago, when Bitcoin dominance was at 52%, and nothing's really changed. Dominance has gone up about 1%, but all of the arguments that I made in that video hold true through today. But I will touch on a few of the main points, okay? And some of those points revolve around this crescendo of Bitcoin dominance into the halving, into rate cuts coming sometime this year, more than likely, right? Now, when we think about dominance and what it has accomplished, what's really fascinating about dominance is that it certainly has given the impression to a lot of people that it's constantly breaking down. I can't tell you how many people I've argued with about this over the last couple of years, but when you take a step back, it really just moves up and then consolidates, and again up and consolidates, and it just keeps on doing it over and over and over again. But no matter how high it goes, and then we get a pullback, there's always people out there that then say, see, I told you so, right? It's not going up. But what's fascinating to me with dominance is if you look at monthly candles, monthly Heikin-Ashi candles, they've literally been green since December of 2022, right? So I get all these messages from people saying like, what if dominance doesn't go up? And I'm like, well, why don't you go ask the people that have been bearish on Bitcoin dominance for the last 2 years what they're doing, considering that it has been in a macro uptrend the entire time, and it has been faded by a lot of people the entire time for some reason. And again, guys, it's not personal with the altcoins. I've said many times there are many altcoins that are outperforming Bitcoin. There's always some that do. But again, it does not detract from the overall trend that Bitcoin has been outperforming most altcoins. Again, is there some micro cap that was created in October that's up 10,000% that you're going to use to say, well, who cares? Perhaps. But the point is I said back then that there would be some altcoins that outperform. Most of the ones that have outperformed are newer altcoins because they don't have the same baggage that a lot of the older altcoins had. That's not to say that none of the older altcoins haven't pumped. Some of them have, but most of them have bled to Bitcoin fairly consistently for a long time. And so, again, I said it's not personal when it comes to the altcoin market, right? It's just the way the cryptoverse has worked, and I think there's this disconnect that people have between, what happens during a bull run that's occurring during quantitative tightening and a bull run that's occurring during quantitative easing. And and again, like the sort of the poster child for that is the ETH Bitcoin pair. I mean, there are so many people that tell me that ETH Bitcoin, or that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, that ETH will outperform Bitcoin in the bull run. And I'm not disputing that at some nebulous point in the future that can happen. What I am disputing is the fact that while it has been said since the merge that ETH Bitcoin will outperform, that ETH will do well against Bitcoin because of the deflationary aspect of it, the tokenomics, whatever, now it's the spot ETF. Despite all of that, despite all of it, right? If you were to go look at quarterly returns for ETH Bitcoin, what you will notice once again is that it is now red 5 quarters in a row, right? I mean, all of 2023 was red, and so far Q1 of 2024 is red. Look at the table, right? I mean, so either the table's wrong or the narratives are wrong. Narratives are great, right? I mean, they a lot of people get behind narratives, especially when it's going their way. But when you're following a narrative about, tokenomics and whatnot, and you're still watching the higher risk asset bleed to Bitcoin, maybe the narrative isn't that important. Maybe it's monetary policy that's more important in that situation. Now, some people have said that because ETH Bitcoin is down since the merge, then that represents a failure of the transition from proof of work to proof of stake. I'm not there, right? I'm actually long-term bullish on Ethereum, but Bitcoin is not as risky. And the fact of the matter, just as we've seen in the stock market, money flows to the safer asset. And we're going through the same process that Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation has gone through 2 previous times. So when you look at dominance, it's building up to a crescendo, right? There's this crescendo that it seems like we're in right now, and that's why I've called it one shining moment. Yes, it was one shining moment last year too, and we saw what happened, right? Bitcoin dominance was able to break out of this level, right? You guys remember that? Now, it took a while, right? I mean, it still took some time. It didn't occur until June. But is it not the same thing? Is it not just slowly building up to it, and then 1 week this will happen and it will just break through? And is it likely that at some point in the future, when Bitcoin dominance theoretically pulls back to 55%, that'll be seen as bearish and people will dunk on it once again? Yeah, probably. But the point is that it has been in an uptrend for a long time. Now, one of the reasons why we followed this is because, again, when you think about how do you maximize your risk adjusted returns, do you want to be heavy Bitcoin? Do you want to be heavy alts? Do you want to have some type of combination? When it comes to ETH Bitcoin, right? So many people say that ETH will outperform Bitcoin in a bull run. But the people that say that, I think only are looking at the 2021 bull run. I'm going to end up going an hour, aren't I? The people that are looking at it, they're only looking at the 2021 bull run when ETH Bitcoin went up during the bull run. That was a QE bull run when the Fed was increasing the size of their balance sheet, right? Increasing the size of their balance sheet, and we were operating at essentially zero interest rates, right? 0%. Right? We were near the lower bound here, 0.25%. So you can see that during a QE bull run, ETH Bitcoin, the ETH Bitcoin pair went up, meaning that ETH outperformed Bitcoin in that bull run. And so a lot of people said, well, since it outperformed back over there, it should outperform it here as well. But they set it at 0.08 and 0.07 and 0.06, right? And now they're saying it at 0.05 that, that sort of that just you wait, it's going to outperform. But what I would retort with is this. We had a very similar bull run by Bitcoin in 2019. That, by the way, mimics a lot of what we've been seeing over here. But what happened was that Bitcoin rallied over 300% at higher rates and during a period where the Federal Reserve was decreasing the size of their balance sheet. And so when you have that combination of high rates and QT, quantitative tightening, what happened? Yes, Bitcoin rallied into it, but ETH Bitcoin fell. Same thing, right? High rates, QT. What's happening? Bitcoin's rallying into it, but ETH Bitcoin fell. So the whole idea, right? I mean, the whole idea here is that while I know a lot of people are sort of reminiscing about what happened in 2021 and late 2020, and they saw the ETH Bitcoin pair go up a lot, I would just say, guys, I mean, if you joined in 2021, if you miss what happened in 2019 during very similar monetary policy, in fact, it's worse today in terms of, we're at higher rates, but in terms of a very similar monetary policy, you would have seen firsthand how ETH bled to Bitcoin. And I saw it firsthand. I feel like I learned a lot. I feel like I learned a ton in this Bitcoin rally. Because even after the Bitcoin rally was over, Bitcoin dominance kept on going up. And so that's why this cycle, I've been very much like pro Bitcoin dominance, because I just keep thinking like, until we get back to looser monetary policy, the altcoins are going to bleed back to the king, right? That doesn't mean every single day or every single week or anything like that, but the general idea is that they bleed back to the king. And so, there are some, of course, pretty important levels that we could look at with a few of these different cryptocurrencies. Obviously, we could start with ETH Bitcoin. If it should be no surprise of what sort of that level to look for is, and it's essentially 0.049. So a weekly close below 0.049 should roughly correspond to 56% Bitcoin dominance. Now, remember, while I do think that ETH Bitcoin will break down, it's important to remember that last cycle, altcoins broke down before Ethereum did, before ETH did. So, and I said previously, right, I said back over here in January that if it can't bounce, or if it can't close that week below it and we bounce, then it's likely going to take, at least until March to get back down to the range lows. Well, here we are. It is March 18th. Yeah, I don't know if you're watching this on March 19th, whatever, but we're getting back down to the range lows. Now, that doesn't mean that it has to break immediately. I mean, it could hang out here for a while, there's still a good chance that altcoins break down before ETH does. And so it's important to remember that, right? Last cycle, when ETH Bitcoin broke down, it actually broke down 2 weeks after alt Bitcoin pairs did, right? You can see the ETH Bitcoin broke down July 8th. Alt Bitcoin pairs actually broke down June 24th, the week of June 24th. So it took Ethereum a little bit longer. Why is that? Well, while I do, poke, sort of have these jabs at ETH, the reality, in my opinion, is it's still better than basically everything else out there besides Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the best, and I don't really think it's that close. But after Bitcoin comes Ethereum. And so that's why I think Ethereum could break down after the collective altcoin market. Now, listen, I know I'm going to say that, and some people are going to get really upset and tell me about why their altcoin is better than Ethereum. But whatever. I mean, the reality is that Ethereum's number 2, so I think the market has spoken. That doesn't mean that it'll stay number 2 forever. I'm convinced that Bitcoin will stay number 1. I think Ethereum will likely stay number 2, but I'm not as convinced about that as Bitcoin. But I still think it's likely to stay number 2. But when I look at all Bitcoin pairs, sort of that same level for them to break is a weekly close at 0.39 or below. And right now they're at 0.45. And again, last cycle, they broke before ETH Bitcoin did. So, that would be the sign is our alt Bitcoin pairs breaking down. And, there's certainly a chance that they will. I mean, look at last cycle. What happened? We had a wick down to the range low. We then got a bounce, and then it slowly rolled over. And that was all she wrote for the altcoin market for quite some time, especially on their Bitcoin pairs. So when it comes to alt Bitcoin pairs, if this thing rolls over, especially into the halving, and this breaks, if that breaks, then you're probably going to see your one shining moment where Bitcoin dominance breaks the range high, just like we talked about a year ago, right? But back then, it was breaking above 49%. Now it's breaking above durably 55%, right? So the target to break out above is 6% higher, right? Instead of 49, it's 55. And it's crazy that, this effectively took almost a year just to go from here to here, but I would say that Bitcoin heavy has helped preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio over altcoin heavy. Now, yeah, there are some altcoins that are up a lot, but most of them have in fact bled to Bitcoin. And again, if you're going to cherry pick people say that, you're just cherry picking altcoins. Sort of my response is well, wouldn't it be the other way around, right? If Bitcoin dominance is in an uptrend for, basically since September of 2022 and really since May of 2021, if you exclude stables, there's been an uptrend since then. Isn't it the people that are saying that alts have outperformed? Wouldn't those be the ones that are cherry picking if the general trend has been up? So, I think the issue is that everyone wants their altcoins to pump against Bitcoin, but a lot of them have not. And some of them have. Please do not let me know about all the ones that have. I know it. But there are some altcoins that we talked about before that are starting to break down. Like Matic Bitcoin has finally put in a weekly close below its range low, right? And this is one I said previously that once it breaks down, ETH Bitcoin will likely follow after. Well, we finally got a weekly close by Matic Bitcoin below 1,722 sats. And now it's below 1,500 sats. That doesn't mean it can't bounce around here for a while, but you guys get the idea, right? It broke down. ADA Bitcoin. I said, at the very least, it's likely going to come back to 800 to 900 sats. Now, I think it's going to go below that. And again, a lot of people are going to point out this trend line. But I'm not convinced that's holding. I think it's more than likely going to fall below that trend line. And I think it makes more sense to sort of look at it like this, right? Where, it's look, the reality is a lot of these altcoins are oscillators at best over a long enough period of time. And so that's why my bias for these altcoins is to go to the downside, right? If you think about it, if you look at alt Bitcoin pairs, again, objectively, right? This here if we were to go grab a price label, 1.35, 0.98. I think it was around 1, right? I think it went to 1. Okay, so it's a lower high. Okay, now here, 0.25, 0.19. That's a lower low. So I think it's like, it's hard because like, I know that everyone wants their altcoins to rally against Bitcoin, but like, this is, you have to wonder, right? And I mean, I don't know how to, I really don't know the best way to draw it. I mean, you could probably draw it 1,000 different ways, but you really do have to wonder, are altcoins just bleeding against the king over a long enough period of time, right? So if you believe the fundamental idea that individual altcoins are oscillators at best against Bitcoin, if you believe that, then wouldn't the collective altcoin market also be a bleeder against Bitcoin? And is that not what is happening? You have a high from this cycle to a lower high in this cycle, and then you have a low in this cycle to a lower low in this cycle. Again, that's sort of the pessimistic way to view, the pessimistic way to look at it. The more optimistic way would be to look at it like this and say it's an oscillator, and that you had to say a deviation outside of the range high and then a deviation outside of the range low. And so that is why I think that rather than calling for, say, like, this to go to 0.15, which it could do, I'd prefer to just say, well, I think 25% is the target. Just like the high was basically parity with Bitcoin, or the altcoin market cap was equivalent to Bitcoin's market cap. So I think it's going to break down, right? And again, like, if you think about, like, why does he have this bias, right? Like, why do I keep going through this? Why do I say the same thing over and over and over again? Monetary policy has not changed, right? And again, I mean, if the idea is that the higher interest rates go and the longer the Fed holds them there and the longer quantitative tightening continues, if the idea is that high-risk assets continue to bleed to low-risk assets, which has been going on for a long time, nothing's changed, right? I mean, nothing's changed in terms of monetary policy. If anything, things have just gotten, interest rates have just stayed higher for longer. So why should I pivot my view when monetary policy hasn't changed? Maybe the only thing that has changed is Bitcoin put in a new high, and there are some examples previously where when Bitcoin puts in new highs, alts can rally. But remember, a lot of times, even when Bitcoin puts in new highs, alts can still bleed. All Bitcoin pairs didn't bottom last cycle until December of the halving year. And before that, it was November of the post-halving year. Well, we don't have enough data to really go back, but it was a parabolic rally by Bitcoin that caused them to bottom. And they bottomed once QE returned. We're still in quantitative tightening. So why the hell should all Bitcoin pairs bottom here? Maybe they do. Maybe I'm wrong. It wouldn't be the first thing, but it wouldn't be the first time I'm wrong about something. That's for sure. But it just seems to me like the inevitable outcome, short-term pump notwithstanding by all Bitcoin pairs, is that it eventually fades and goes to the range lows. And you can see it happening with individual altcoins, right? Now, the hard part with alts is that no matter what time, there's always something pumping against Bitcoin, right? So like recently we've seen, like AVAX, the AVAX Bitcoin pair doing well, right? And so people are saying, well, what about that, right? Or Solana. I mean, Solana's done pretty well against Bitcoin as well. So what about that? The hard part about all this is that, like, at any given point, there's always going to be some alts that are doing well. Think about what happened like late 2022, early 2021, or early 2023. Matic Bitcoin was doing very well. In fact, I mean, it rallied back up to the range highs, right? I mean, it rallied 276%. But now it gave back all of those gains and is now putting in levels. It's at levels that it hasn't seen since April of 2021. April of 2021 is when Bitcoin dominance was collapsing. So if you find all these individual altcoins going below their prior range lows, then eventually it likely means that Bitcoin dominance breaks above its range high and you get that one shining moment. Another example, Aave Bitcoin broke the summer 2022 lows long ago. Now it's starting to break the next lows, right? So, I mean, you can see that a lot of these alts, I mean, look at the overall trend here, right? Look at this curve, right? I mean, they're just slowly bleeding. And the reality is that, yeah, like every once in a while you get these crazy pumps by them, but it's still slowly going down. So, yeah, I mean, like at any given point, like, so like Matic Bitcoin did well back in mid 2022, early 2023, but it hasn't done really well since. AVAX Bitcoin is doing well now, but it wasn't really doing a whole lot back then. I mean, it went up a little bit, but not back up to the range highs like Matic Bitcoin did. So there's always something, right? I mean, even Link Bitcoin. Again, I Link is a coin that I talked about a lot last cycle, but I mean, anytime it gets close, it just gets rejected. BNB Bitcoin. I mean, it was putting in new lows just a few months ago. What is there to say about Litecoin Bitcoin? I mean, if there's an altcoin that knows how to bleed against Bitcoin, it is Litecoin. I mean, look at this thing. Down 97.62% since 2013. XRP Bitcoin. XRP Bitcoin. Just look, it's dropped even more since I last made this video, right? Now it's down 96% since 2017. It's about opportunity cost, guys. I mean, it's about opportunity cost, right? I mean, back in 2017, right? December 2017, XRP was like $3, right? Today it's 61 cents. And everyone just keeps on waiting for the big one, right? And I'm not saying it's never going to pump. I mean, you can see that when it gets down to these range lows, it can get some moves back up. But the reality is that XRP is well below, it's like 20% of what the USD valuation was in 2017, whereas Bitcoin is many multiples of where it was back then, right? It's like 3x where it was in late 2017. So it's all about opportunity cost, and it's all about preserving the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio. So yes, there's always some that are doing well, and I think some people sort of hold on to those few to sort of say, well, the Bitcoin dominance trend is not what you think, but it's just there's people are rotating from this altcoin to that altcoin. There's always something pumping, but you know what hasn't changed in the last couple of years? Bitcoin dominance in terms of the trend. It just keeps on going up. So over here, people were speculating on certain altcoins. And then over here, they were speculating on different ones. And then over here, they're speculating on even different ones. But the reality is that throughout all of it, Bitcoin dominance just kept going up. And again, it should until looser monetary policy rises. Again, if you're not familiar with like the general business cycle, I mean, think about bankruptcies. The longer this goes on for, the more bankruptcies there will be. Look at United States bankruptcies, right? I mean, they're really starting to move up here. Again, in the grand scheme, they're still pretty low, but they are moving quickly. The frothiest of things go out of business first, right? That's why FTX and all these Celsius, right? They collapse first. Luna, the frothiest of stuff collapses first. The stronger stuff survives longer. But even then, I mean, things will continue to drop. We saw another EV company go bankrupt just last week? Fisker? I mean, look at this thing. Just a slow bleed And then this is what happened, right? Why? These companies, they just run out of cash, right? They can't keep operating in a high interest rate environment forever when demand continues to fall. And if they can't look out in the future and envision a world in the foreseeable future where there's a lot lower rates and demand's coming back, then what do? I mean, they can't just operate losing money forever, so they declare bankruptcy. The same principle, I think, could be applied to altcoins. Yes, some can do well for periods of time. I'm not disputing that. But only the strong will survive this, right? Only the stronger ones will ultimately survive. And that's why, for me, right, during a quantitative tightening, a rate hiking cycle, right, for me, I don't really care about all this froth in the cryptoverse. That's why I've said just Bitcoin heavy. Now, that doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't go down. I've said that many times. Part of the idea is that Bitcoin does occasionally go down. It crushes altcoins. But again, some of them can still do well. What I've said before is that a major risk-off signal for the altcoin market would be dominance breaking above this level. That's what I've said many times, in fact. Because you've noticed, after a lot of these Bitcoin pullbacks, what happens? Altcoins, they just keep on going up. Like, look at Total 3. I mean, it literally just put on a new high for this cycle a week ago, right? So where does that trend potentially change? I think that trend potentially changes if and when dominance breaks above this level. The reason for that is because a couple of reasons why. One is that level, a little above that level, 56%, corresponds to the 0.5 fib retracement. Right, 56%. So if we can break above 55.3% and then we just quickly go to 56, that's the same level that last cycle, when it broke through the 0.5 fib, that's what sort of marked a local top by Bitcoin USD. Right there, when it went through the 0.5 fib. And Bitcoin didn't go on to put in a new low or anything like that, but it did cool off for a little while. And, I know some people here are just sort of the up-only crowd. But, at some point, Bitcoin will cool off for a while. And, if that phase comes soon, then what you would see is sort of like an area where Bitcoin continues to just sort of suck that liquidity out of the altcoin market, right? So, like, imagine a future scenario where Bitcoin rallies back up. I don't know if it'll be a higher high or a lower high, but whatever it ends up being, theoretically, alt Bitcoin pairs should break down. Now, the reason why it's taken so long for alt Bitcoin pairs to break down is because there's a lot of liquidity sloshing back and forth. Remember, alt Bitcoin pairs broke down last cycle when they began cutting rates. But alt Bitcoin pairs did not break down because they started to cut rates, right? It's that the Fed started to cut rates because the consumer was starting to show weakness. So I'm not saying that the Fed cares about your altcoins, right? But if alt Bitcoin pairs were to break down, that might imply that the consumer is showing weakness in other areas of the economy, making the Fed pivot, right? Making the Fed go back to looser monetary policy. And that phase, I think, is still ahead of us. Now, there's been a lot of times where we've gotten close to breaking below this level, but we keep not breaking below it. One of the things maybe not is because rate cuts keep getting pushed further and further out, right? One time they seem like they're going to happen this month, and they just keep getting pushed further and further out. So the economy continues chugging along. People are like, oh, well, maybe things aren't so bad. And then alt Bitcoin pairs get another bounce, right? But I think at some point they will break down. And it'll likely correspond near to when the Fed starts to cut rates, right? Maybe alt Bitcoin pairs break down and the Fed cuts rates shortly thereafter. Not because altcoins are breaking down, but because it represents weakness in the consumer, the average retail person, right? It would represent weakness in the consumer if alt Bitcoin pairs cannot keep pace. And for a while, they've been keeping pace. And you might say, well, why is this time so different? Well, it's not really. If you look at it here, when it hit this low, alt Bitcoin pairs took 41 weeks to break down. From this low right here, we're currently 38 weeks in. Guess what 41 week says? The week mid-April, a month from now, right around the Bitcoin halving, right? Right around the Bitcoin halving. Maybe it'll correspond to just before rate cuts in May or June. So I continue to be of the opinion that the collective altcoin market will in fact bleed to Bitcoin. And I don't think any rational person could look at this chart and say that all Bitcoin pairs collectively have been bullish. I think that a rational person could go pick out some altcoins that have done well against Bitcoin, maybe even more than some. I mean, maybe more than just say a few. But when there's tens of thousands of cryptocurrencies, the amount that have durably outperformed Bitcoin isn't really that much over the last 2 years. So, but it's easy. I mean, there's always some that do. There's always some that do. And again, I mean, you could look at other things like there's others Bitcoin, which some people like to look at. And again, I mean, it had a nice rally up over here into April 2019, a few months before rate cuts arrived, but then it still fell. So I'm still of the opinion that all Bitcoin pairs will bleed. And some of these things are sort of in confluence in terms of if we do get above 56% dominance, or if we get to 56%, there's some things of confluence I think that are important to look at. For instance, gold is durably going above 2070. We said that would be a signal. That's happened. Alt Bitcoin pairs still haven't broken down. ETH Bitcoin still hasn't broken down, but that stuff can all happen. Some other things to think about are, sort of the relative strength of Bitcoin. Here's a great example of the relative strength of Bitcoin. Do you guys remember in sort of the fib retracement from here to, so you can see that Bitcoin rallied up into the 3.618 fib retracement. Now it has gone all the way up to the 4.236, basically to the dollar, right? You see that chart, right? Bitcoin 3.618 in 2021, but in 2024, 4.236. Now look at total. It's reversed. 2021, it went to the 4.236. Today, 3.618. Bitcoin has shown relative strength compared to the rest of the market, right? Because total includes Bitcoin, but hasn't retraced to the 4.236 like Bitcoin has. So, I mean, again, I think there's this rotation of capital going on from alts to Bitcoin. It's not entirely just that. I mean, I think there's just more money going into Bitcoin and altcoins can't keep up with it. But do you see how, like, Bitcoin has been stronger? I mean, it's not that surprising. I mean, Bitcoin's hit new highs. Not many other things have. I mean, Ethereum hasn't hit new highs. Solana, while it's done well, hasn't hit new highs. XRP, not even close, right? Uniswap, not even close. Doge, not even close, right? So logs go, right? But not even close. Matic, long way to go. Link, nope. Litecoin, Dot, yeah, right. AVAX, still a long way to go to get to new highs. I'm not saying they can't ever get there, right? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, like, Bitcoin heavy has helped preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio. And if Bitcoin were to correct and altcoins haven't hit new highs, what does that mean? I mean, they just go back down a lot. I mean, that's the thing. Like, Bitcoin would have the luxury to correct and still be well above these lows, whereas a lot of altcoins, who knows? Who really knows? And again, I mean, it can, of course, altcoins can break down against Bitcoin on either Bitcoin rallies or Bitcoin dumps, right? We've seen that many, many times. And it's hard to know, which one it'll be. It could probably be a combination of both, right? Like, we've seen Bitcoin drop the last couple of weeks, and we've seen altcoins start to show some weakness against Bitcoin, right? They're down from 48% down to 46%. If you get, say, a pump into the halving or after the halving or sometime, whether it forms a higher high for Bitcoin or a lower high, I imagine alt Bitcoin pairs would then break down and find themselves somewhere over here. And that's the issue, right? If and when that happens, if they break down, then there's nowhere to hide, right? Like going back to some of the ones that recently broke down, right? Like Matic Bitcoin. It's been all this time trying to hold this as support, and then now it hasn't, and it's broken down. And now you have to wonder, right? Like what are all these people thinking that so vehemently defended this low for so long? Now it's below that level. So what do, right? I mean, look what happened to ADA Bitcoin after it finally broke these lows over here last cycle, right? I mean, it sort of finally broke these lows, and then it just capitulated down. So a lot of that I think could sort of repeat itself, given enough time. I think a lot of people just don't like waiting for this stuff to play out. But I mean, even look at like ADA Bitcoin, just a downtrend, right? Just a downtrend. So I think the catalysts are certainly there. What would cause the Fed to cut rates? Something's got to happen, right? I mean, I don't know what it would be. It could be a scary unemployment rate print. I mean, you can kind of see everything playing out, right? I mean, Bitcoin dominance is going up. Everyone's chasing this mania stuff. At the same time, the unemployment rate's going higher. It hit 3.9%. Again, I've said before, the market rallies until it has a reason not to do so. Markets generally go up until it has a reason not to do so. And I've said the two main reasons that it wouldn't are unemployment rate going up, hitting that 4%. I've said 4% is the main target or the main level that I think the market would care, or inflation reaccelerates. And inflation is not really reaccelerating, but the issue for the Fed is that it's not really going down either, and it's been at 3% for a long time. So you could sort of think about like people are getting excited about alts, hoping that inflation subsides and the Fed cuts. But what's happening is the wealth effect, right? The Fed's not cutting. Altcoins continue to hold because the economy is still holding up. Therefore, altcoins go up. The wealth effect is in place. People spend more money. The Fed has to go higher for longer. And we just keep on going on and on and on and on. And then eventually the economy finally shows weakness because the Fed has stayed too high for too long. Then altcoins finally break down. Then the Fed pivots. We go back to looser monetary policy. We see how much damage the Fed has done. Then we go back to quantitative easing. And when we go through another phase where in a future bull run, then maybe ETH Bitcoin does do well, right? But the reality is, anyone who's been bullish on ETH Bitcoin since the merge has been wrong, right? I mean, it's dropped a lot since then. So yeah, you can see the unemployment rate slowly turning the corner, right? As everyone chases the manic rally. My sort of speculation all along has been like, guys, having exposure to invest, to something is a good idea. And the way that you do that in crypto is just be Bitcoin heavy, right? And to say, well, to hell with all this other stuff. I don't know how long it's going to take for the economy to show weakness and the Fed to pivot and all that stuff. But Bitcoin gives you exposure to the upside while minimizing your downside risk, right? That's what I've said all along. It doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't go down, right? It probably will go down a lot at some point. Who knows when that will be? If you were to look at days since Bitcoin had a 30% drop, look at this. We're at day 496. This is what happens, right? You go up for so long and it feels like it'll never drop, and then finally does, and it catches people off guard. So again, that's likely going to happen where Bitcoin does get a larger drop. At this point, this drop by Bitcoin is still fairly consistent with what we've previously seen. And we talked about this in one of the recent videos, right? At this point, right, again, things could change, but at this point, this correction by Bitcoin is a 12% drop. Again, we've seen plenty of 20 to 22% drops. Right? All of these prior drops were like 20 to 22% drops, roughly. So when thinking about where we currently are, only 12% down. 20% down puts you at 58K. Now, 58K, coincidentally, is the 8-week SMA. It's at 57.5. So that would be an area to watch, that 8-week moving average. 22% is right around that 8-week moving average, right? 57.5. The bull market support band, on the other hand, is much further down at around 33% down. Now, the issue with going 33% down is it's further down than what we've been seeing throughout this cycle. And again, like the 2019 rally, it had pretty short pullbacks. And then when it finally did get a larger pullback to the bull market support band, and it was about a 30-something% drop, that was it for a while, right? The Fed pivoted. We went back to looser monetary policy, but the damage had been done, and the economy was weak, was somewhat weak for a little while. And riskier assets like crypto, like altcoins, really started to do poorly. I mean, Bitcoin held up okay. It still dropped 50% before the pandemic, but it held up a lot better than the altcoin market did. The altcoin market got obliterated during that time. The hard part is knowing exactly where that top occurs. Now, the reality is that this cycle is not exactly like 2019 because we actually put in a new high, right? So I don't mean to say that it's exactly the same, but there's this other reality, and that is everyone keeps looking at the social risk whenever I do these videos and saying, well, look how low it is. Everyone's going to come back. My only point is that 300% rallies don't always bring retail back. 2019, we had a 300% rally. Now, we didn't hit a new all-time high, but we still had about over a 300% rally. And it didn't bring retail back. We had to wait another year and a half, and retail didn't come back until looser monetary policy arrived. So what happens if the same thing occurs, right? What happens if you cool off, after the halving or even now, and then we go back to looser monetary policy, and then you get another move later on in, say, 2025 or something. Because again, I mean, like so far, this 2023, 2024 rally by Bitcoin, the social risk looks like 2019, right? There's no guarantee that retail returns, right? There's no guarantee that YouTube views go back up to these levels. You can have spikes, but even that spike is already starting to trend back down. 300% rallies by Bitcoin do not bring retail back. What brings retail back is altcoins starting to durably outperform Bitcoin. Everyone talks about alt season, right? And look, alt season is not 10 different cherry-picked altcoins outperforming Bitcoin. Alt season is where Bitcoin dominance is collapsing like this, right? Where is alt season in here? Get the magnifying glass, right? That's not what alt season looks like. Retail returns when this happens, right? That's not what we're seeing. So again, I'm not saying that it can't eventually go to that. Probably will eventually. But my point is that you can't just look at this stuff and assume that it has to go all the way back up to the highest risk band immediately, right? In 2019, we rallied at the 0.3 to 0.4 risk band with social risk, and then we still cooled off for a while and rallied like a year and a half later. So again, it's just something to think about. So with Bitcoin dominance, my general view is that we break above the range high over the next few months. I don't know how long it's going to take. I wish I did, but I'm not going to blow smoke and tell you I know when it's going to happen. I don't. But I think that a lot of signs are pointing to that is the inevitable outcome. Could we go back down first? Yeah, it's possible. But I do think that is the inevitable outcome, is that it slowly builds up here to the highs, and then it eventually breaks out. And again, you can kind of see it. I mean, look at, you can sort of see this ascending triangle, right? It looks like it wants to break out. Does it come back down first and then do it, or does it just go straight up? I don't know. But it does look like it wants to eventually break out. So that's where we are, right? That's where we are with it. And there's a good chance that we'll have some more pullbacks by dominance. And there's a 100% chance that when we do, people will use that as a reason to dunk on me. But, when you take a step back and you look at this, it has just been one massive uptrend. It's alts have slowly bled back to the king. And I think that people will finally get the memo if and when this breakout occurs. I still think there's a lot of people that sort of didn't believe this one over here. And then a lot of people, when it broke out over here, they didn't think it was going to. They were calling for alt season, a rejection off the range high. They were wrong, right? But because Bitcoin USD kept going up, their altcoins were carried along for the ride. At some point, Bitcoin USD will get a pullback, and then their altcoins, they'll find out that the only reason their altcoins were going up was because Bitcoin was going up. And if Bitcoin goes down, the altcoin market goes down a lot. So again, I don't know if exactly when that occurs. What I've said before is that I think that occurs when Bitcoin dominance breaks above the range highs, right? When it gets to that 56% level, I think that's when that occurs. And as I've said before, right, 56%. We haven't hit that, right? And because we haven't hit it, there still is that liquidity that Bitcoin can take from the altcoin market, right? So if and when another rally by Bitcoin occurs, whether it's next week or next month or 3 months from now, what you should look for, what happens to dominance? Does it break out does dominance break out as Bitcoin gets that move back up whenever it occurs? Or does Bitcoin dominance break out because Bitcoin just keeps on dropping and that lower high or higher high just doesn't happen anytime soon? I don't know. But I'm still watching this. I think it's, as I've said before, I think Bitcoin dominance is the key to unlocking the secrets of the cryptoverse. I think that it's people are happy about their alts because they're doing well on their USD pairs, but a lot of them are not doing well in the Bitcoin pairs. Right? A lot of these are just in macro downtrends for those who care to look. And even ETH Bitcoin, even the king of the altcoin market, is still bleeding back down to the range lows. And we said March at the earliest for it to bleed back down to the range lows. March at the earliest. Doesn't mean it has to break the range lows in March, but just to get back down into this level, we said March at the earliest. Here we are, right? So that's where we are. If retail does not come back like they did in 2021 or 2017, then the implication is that Bitcoin dominance should break out. Because when social risk here, sorry, let me get the, I'm trying to remember where it, social risk, here it is. You can see pretty clearly, right? Social risk, even if it goes up, if it comes back down, right, if it stays low, dominance should go up, right? It has gone up a little bit recently, social risk. And you can see that dominance, excluding stables, has come down a little bit, just like it did over here. But eventually, dominance still broke out and social risk came back down. So that's where I think we are. I think that social risk will eventually go back down and dominance will continue to break out, because the way that dominance goes down is that retail comes back in mass. And I don't think that we can definitively say that that's going to happen just yet. It could happen, and if it does, I'd like to think I'd be willing to pivot my view, but it hasn't happened yet. Some retail has come back, but even the some retail that has come back, we're still in the 0.3 to 0.4 risk band, which is exactly where we were back in 2019. We made it to the 0.3 to 0.4 risk band. And that was also over a 300% rally. Where it's a little unclear is we hit new all-time highs. So you can see that, because we hit new all-time highs, now the social risk has gone up even more than it was back over here, right? So there's a little bit of a difference. But the overall trend, I think, remains the same, right? Dominance is going up, all Bitcoin pairs are bleeding, and so on and so forth. Again, guys, if you want to join the bracket challenge for Into the Cryptoverse March Madness 2024, links in the description below, password BTC.D. Winner will get a free 1-year subscription to Into the Cryptoverse Premium. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.